Welcome to the deep dive. We're charting a course today through, well, a really profound shift in global power dynamics. And it was all sort of crystallized by this one event back in January 2022.
You mean the visit of the 6 Middle Eastern foreign ministers to China?
Exactly. 6 ministers from countries often locked in pretty deep rivalries, all showing up in Beijing within days of each other. Just unprecedented.
And the timing, that was really the headline grabber, wasn't it? It
Yeah.
wasn't some quiet behind-the-scenes thing.
No, not right.
It happened right smack during the U.S. Summit for Democracy and, just before the Beijing Winter Olympics kicked off. That felt very deliberate, a very public signal.
Absolutely, it screamed major pivot. So our mission today for you listening is to unpack that, to really understand the deep roots, historical, religious, economic, strategic, that push these nations together.
Nations that have been tangled in these, well, seemingly intractable conflicts for decades.
Right. And now they're collectively looking for a powerful new external partner, someone to counterbalance Western influence, basically, and maybe help them break out of this security and economic stalemate they feel they're in.
Yeah, to really grasp how big a deal this pivot is, you first have to appreciate just how complex the Middle East is fundamentally. I mean, geopolitically, the whole region is kind of structured around 3 main civilizational power centers.
Okay, yeah, let's lay those out. These are the pillars that seem to generate so much of the tension, right?
Right. So first, you've got the Gulf Arab states.
Oh.
Think Saudi Arabia, primarily. They're seen as the sort of nominal leader of the Sunni majority Arab world, the heart of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council.
Okay, pillar 1, Sunni Arab states led by Saudi.
Pillar 2, Iran, the historical center of Shia Islam. And Iran's been strategically building influence, creating what some analysts call the Shia Crescent, stretching through Iraq, Syria.
And that crescent is a major source of anxiety for the U.S., for Saudi Arabia, for Israel, too. It definitely shifts the regional power balance, or threatens to.
It absolutely does. Then the third major player is Turkey. Under its recent leadership, Turkey's been really pushing this Turkic states alliance, positioning itself as the leader of Turkic nations, who are mostly Sunni, by the way.
So you have these 3 big blocks, Gulf Arabs, Shia Iran, and Turkic Turkey. And the friction between them isn't new, is it? It goes way back.
Centuries back. But the most visible friction point today is probably that Saudi-Iran rivalry, which really is the modern expression of that ancient religious split between Sunni and Shia.
Right. We don't need to get bogged down in theology, but what's the core issue there that affects geopolitics now?
Well, at its heart, it's about legitimacy. Who had the right to lead after the Prophet Muhammad died? Sunnis accepted the first few caliphs. Shias insisted only Ali, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, had the legitimate divine right.
So a fundamental disagreement about leadership and succession from the very beginning.
Exactly. And that created this deep, millennium-old conflict, a sort of inherent distrust where each side questions the other's legitimacy to rule or lead. That's the instability Western policies often, frankly, struggle to navigate effectively.
That context is so important. This deep historical conflict has led to a kind of strategic exhaustion in the region, hasn't it?
I think so, yes. And that exhaustion really opened the door for the economic and strategic pivot we're seeing. They're looking for a different approach.
And they're seeing, or perceiving, a decline in U.S. influence.
Yeah.
They've watched the U.S. pull back strategically, militarily, economically in some ways.
Yeah, and certain events, like the way the U.S. Summit for Democracy was perceived, maybe lacking concrete results, probably added to that feeling. When the power that seemed like the main security guarantor starts looking less engaged, well, you start looking elsewhere for stability.
And then there's the massive structural change in the oil market. That feels like the biggest single economic driver here. The U.S. just isn't the essential customer it used to be.
That's absolutely fundamental. Shale oil, fracking, it completely changed the game. The U.S. went from being the world's biggest oil importer to becoming a major exporter.
Which puts it in direct competition with Middle Eastern producers.
Exactly. So that old bond, that shared interest between, say, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, we provide oil, you provide security, it's weakened fundamentally, especially when you factor in the rising perceived costs and conditions of U.S. protection.
So if the U.S. is now a competitor, who becomes the indispensable economic partner?
Well, look at the demand side. China is by far the world's largest oil importer. They need the energy now, so they're the main buyer.
But it's not just about today's oil, right?
Yeah.
You hear this talk about the future.
Right. It's also about the next energy era. Aligning with China is seen as betting on the future. China's dominant in solar, wind, EVs, batteries, the whole new energy transition. Middle Eastern states know they need that technology, that market, the supply chains to diversify their own economies away from just oil.
And there's something else China brings, isn't there? Just sheer scale.
Yeah, the logistical capacity. Materials, engineers, huge construction teams, the capital, the project management for massive infrastructure projects, rebuilding Iraq, developing new cities in the Gulf. No other single country can really match that scale right now.
And you see the flip side, the risk of not diversifying or finding new partners when you look at Turkey recently.
Oh, absolutely. Turkey faced a really severe economic crisis. The lira collapsed, partly driven by Western financial pressure or sanctions linked to geopolitical disagreements.
So for Ankara, turning to China wasn't just strategic, it became almost a lifeline, right? Because who else could offer that kind of significant, quick economic support without the same political strings attached?
Precisely. Which brings us neatly to this new model of diplomacy China seems to be offering. It's a direct challenge to the way things have been run since World War II.
And it's encapsulated in that quote from China's foreign minister.
Right. The people of the Middle East are the masters of the Middle East. There is no power vacuum, nor does it need an external guardian.
That's a powerful statement. It's basically rejecting the whole idea of external powers, read the West, calling the shots, rejecting what they see as hegemony, maybe even imperialism.
Yeah, it pushes back against that might makes right philosophy they often feel subjected to. Instead, China promotes its concept of a community with a shared future for mankind.
Which emphasizes
Absolute respect for sovereignty, for different national paths. Crucially, it doesn't try to impose Western-style democracy, which, has a pretty spotty track record when forced onto societies with very different histories and cultures.
Okay, so if China isn't imposing solutions, what is its role? What are they actually doing on the ground?
Primarily, they position themselves as a facilitator. The Chinese term is kuohe, which means sort of promoting cooperation or bringing parties together.
Bringing rivals together, like Sunni and Shia representatives.
Exactly. Sunni, Shia, Turkic leaders, facilitating dialogue, helping them coordinate. That's a role the U.S. traditionally dominated or tried to.
And the underlying philosophy is different, too. It's focused on
Development. The core idea is that economic progress, lifting people out of poverty, building infrastructure, that's the most fundamental way to stabilize things and eventually mitigate those deep historical and religious conflicts. It's development first, politics second.
which is pretty much the opposite of the Western approach sometimes, which often leads with political reform or security interventions.
Right. And you see practical examples like the China-Iraq oil for schools deal.
Yeah.
Very straightforward. Iraq provides oil, China builds schools. Direct, tangible development assistance focused on basic needs, not complex political engineering or military aid.
And Beijing seems to be getting a diplomatic payoff already. I mean, we saw the Saudi foreign minister publicly supporting China on sensitive issues.
Yeah, backing China's position on Xinjiang, on human rights, directly pushing back against Western narratives. That shows how much these states value China's non-interference approach. They're willing to offer a political cover in return.
There's also that visual contrast the sources mentioned, illustrating the difference in diplomatic style.
Oh, the photos. Yes. You had that picture of President Trump with the Serbian President Vučić, who was sitting in the small chair way below Trump, looking almost like he was being lectured.
Yeah, it went viral.
And then you contrast that with photos of the Chinese leader meeting Vučić during the Beijing Olympics, sitting side by side, very respectful, friendly. That visual difference says a lot about the kind of relationship being offered. Equality versus hierarchy. It resonates.
Okay, let's zoom in on some of the regional flashpoints through this new lens. What about Iran? After the Soleimani assassination, all the U.S. military posturing, how does that look now?
Well, some analysts argue that a lot of U.S. actions now look more like posturing, kind of going through the motions in what they're calling a post-American era in the region.
Meaning the actions don't have the same impact.
Perhaps. Iran's resistance seems pretty determined. Whether it's confronting U.S. ships or pushing forward with its nuclear program or, the perceived strategic gains of Shia allies in places like Yemen, it suggests a level of, as the sources put it, civilizational self-respect and defiance. They seem determined to carve their own path, forcing the U.S. to react rather than dictate.
And then you have Turkey, a NATO ally, but pursuing a very different path under Erdogan.
Yeah, Turkey's fascinating. Erdogan's pushed this assertive, pan-Turkic, religiously infused foreign policy. It's a real break from Ataturk's secular foundations.
And that expansionist vision trying to lead the Turkic world It's caused problems, hasn't it?
It certainly has. It's alienated some neighbors, and importantly, it's been a big factor in their economic troubles we mentioned earlier. When your ideology leads to sanctions and economic instability, you become much more reliant on partners like China, who prioritize economics over ideological alignment.
Now, despite this recent pivot feeling new, the connections between China and the Middle East aren't actually new at all, are they? There's a much longer history there.
Absolutely. That history adds a layer of sort of natural affinity. Islam first arrived in China very early on, not just overland via the Silk Road, but also by sea, the Maritime Silk Road, reaching cities like Quanzhou.
So there are centuries of trade and cultural exchange.
Deep historical ties. It makes the current relationship feel less like a sudden, strange alignment and more like maybe a return to a historical pattern of connection. There was even that anecdote in the sources about Turkish scholars joking that Turkish food is the world's second best after Chinese. A small detail, but it hints at a deep-seated respect.
And what about China's domestic approach to religion, particularly Islam? The term used is Sinicization.
Right. And we need to be clear, Sinicization isn't about forcing conversion. It's about integrating religious practices in communities so they align with broader Chinese laws and core cultural values like respecting laws, elders, national unity. It's about making religion compatible with the socialist system from the state's perspective.
How is that generally perceived in the Muslim world?
Well, according to some sources, many Muslim communities actually view China relatively positively as a host. Why? Because the government officially recognizes 5 major religions and, in theory, treats them equally. There isn't the same history of colonial religious imposition or, say, specific state favoritism towards one religion over Islam that you might see elsewhere. That perception of impartiality can be a soft power advantage for China.
Okay, so let's bring this all together. For you listening, what's the main takeaway from this new breakthrough? It's not just that 6 ministers visited Beijing together.
No, it's about the shift in approach that visit represented. A potential move away from a system driven by external hegemony, one that often seemed to incite conflict towards something different.
A framework that puts development first, emphasizes mutual respect, and crucially, advances the idea that the future of the Middle East should be decided by the people of the Middle East.
That's the core principle China is championing, and it's clearly finding receptive ears.
And perhaps, as a final thought to leave you with, there's a fascinating historical irony here.
Which-
Well, conflicts are notoriously hard to solve when external powers keep interfering, right?
Yeah.
But some might argue that U.S. policy, by trying to contain or isolate rivals, is actually pushing these diverse, often historically antagonistic Middle Eastern states together, consolidating them around a new pole China.
It's almost like it could be validating that old prediction by Samuel Huntington. The idea that down the line, Islamic civilization and Chinese civilization might find common ground and cooperate against the West.
A prediction that maybe seemed far-fetched decades ago.
But now, watching this consolidation happen, driven partly by the very policies designed to prevent such alliances, well, that's certainly a development that researchers and all of us will find fascinating to watch unfold.